All right, we should be good to go. So closing costs and an offer. I had this, I think somebody sent me this a while back, and I've had it saved on my desktop, and I just hadn't had a chance to get in and make some edits to it. So I was playing around with it a little bit last night and just kind of wanted to pull it up and kind of just talk through this a little bit. As we know, and it kind of steps it out at the beginning here, you know, requesting that a seller pay some closing costs is a typical part of a lot of offers, and we know that. Why is it so common, would you guys say?
So that they don't have to bring cash to the table.
Or bring as much to the table.
Yeah, so the buyers don't have to come out of pocket as much with funds to close. Yeah, definitely. You know, and I know that we've seen it working with sellers. We've seen it a lot more working with buyers. I mean, because we always try and do as much as possible as we can for our folks, right? But that being said, there are some limitations that exist for seller concessions or for sellers paying closing costs. So just wanted to make sure that we kind of revisit these because we don't talk about it a lot other than kind of just actually structuring and what's behind it. The first one, as I'm sure that you guys can all relate to, is, you know, the seller concessions cannot exceed the sum of the buyer's closing costs, right? So the seller can't actually bring more than a certain amount, right? Um, if the seller, if there are amounts that they've paid that the seller's willing to pay, say they agreed to pay $6,000, right? But the actual buyer closing costs are only $4,000. What happens to that extra $2,000?
Doesn't go to the buyer.
Right. So,
But I've seen a lot of cases lately, especially one for my poor seller, where he thought he was gonna, there was no way they were gonna use all of it, and the lender ended up editing it where they were paying for 6 months of insurance in the escrow account and 6 months of property taxes, and then he'd reimburse their appraisal and then put the appraisal in there. And
So he divvied it up.
oh yeah, I mean, they used every penny. So I mean, just something to think about. I mean, there are ways, if you're representing a buyer anyway and you're in that situation, I would look at adding more things.
and that's the point I really wanted to make, is make sure that you're having the conversation with the lender about what those costs actually are. I'm working with Andy on one right now, and he's like, have they paid their inspections yet? Good. Don't let them pay their inspections. We want them on the CD because we've got this money and we need to use it for something.
But you have to make sure that the vendor is okay with that.
You do, yeah. Now, I think most all of our vendors are okay with that. Some inspectors will charge a little bit more if you pay at closing and you don't pay at time of inspection when they release the report. So that's something you'll need to work with April on to see exactly what the people require. That's also why on the closing checklist, the option is for the inspections to be paid at closing or at time of inspection to make sure that you're getting out ahead of that. Here's the thing. If you get $6,000 or whatever, make sure you know that how it's going to be used. Have the conversation with the lender. Don't just do the, hey, 3% is $6,000. Let's roll with that and see what happens.
Well, 3% is the max, correct? And that's not usually what 3% is a high number.
That's an average. That
Ballpark.
It's typically a little high for most. I mean, but then again, it all comes down to someone's specific situation. Are they putting a little money down? Are they buying points?
Yeah.
So it all really depends. So the real point I wanted to make to play off of what Tiffany said is make sure that you're talking with your lender partner to get it figured out. Because the folks that we work with over and over, they get it and they're looking out for that stuff because they want to take care of their clients too. But what if you're working with a lender you've never worked with before? Just make sure that you're going the extra distance.
I do have a question. Are USDA closing costs more than, say, a different loan program? Because the two people that I've had recently that I've used USDA, their closing costs have been so high. I'm not sure why.
In my experience, they have been. Okay. A little bit later on, we'll get to it. According to this info, they will allow a higher They allow up to 6% on FHA, and USDA
Okay.
allows 4. The second real big thing to take into consideration is the appraisal. So what usually happens when we're tacking closing costs into a deal? They're paying more than you would for the house, usually, right? Now that's all well and good if the house has been on the market for 45 days and comps show that it's under or overpriced or whatever, or even if it's priced right and you offer a list price and then $4,000, so the seller's netting $4K less than list price, right? But what happens if you're multiple offers?
Should good practice not ask for any closing costs.
Right. That's really the expectation you really want to set with regard to closing costs in multiple offer situations. Just because if it's paying cash, it doesn't matter anyways, right? There's no reason to ask for cash and there's no reason to ask for closing costs in a cash offer, right? Because you're basically just offsetting what the net is. In a multiple offer situation, if you're asking for closing costs, that means you're going to have to pay more for the house, which you're already paying more for the house because you're a multiple offer situation. And then you run the risk of the appraisal. So make sure that you really try to make sure that you set that expectation with your clients. Look, if we're going to be looking at competitive properties and you need closing costs, you might have to decide if you want to look at competitive properties or you need the closing costs. Because you're fighting against yourself.
Yeah.
And it's all well and good to get under contract and say you'll work it out later on. But sometimes you don't work it out later on. And then you have to start over, and then they've already invested all this money that they don't have because they're clearly asking for closing costs. Right? So just, sometimes, especially if you've been working with someone for a while, maybe it's just your first time out and you're really excited to help them. Sometimes it's easy just to say, oh, great, let's get under contract. We'll handle it later. But it's not always easy to handle it later. That's all.
It's like they have to have a plan in case it doesn't appraise. Are they willing to bring the money to the table? Right?
Correct.
Before you get the buyer under contract, you should tell them it's going to be 3% of the sale price.
No, you shouldn't. You say on average, we use that as a rough average. You need to get it from your lender because with a specific property, they can tell you exactly what your closing costs should be. And they're going to overestimate it a little bit anyways, because they get in trouble if they give you the wrong number. And it ends up being higher than they are always going to overestimate it. They should anyways.
And is that where so the lender comes in and says, okay, it's going to be 2% of the sales price. And then the appraiser comes in and appraises it. But so they've already given this money either in earnest money or DD. And then the appraiser comes in and appraises it lower. Is that where you're having this?
They have automatic equity in the house if it appraises lower.
Right, but that's where you're getting the extra money at the end.
I meant higher.
Closing.
You could, yeah, if that ends up being the case, or the numbers could just, if the closing date changes, then your taxes and your escrow and everything and all the credits can change. Because the numbers will be different from Wednesday to Thursday.
Yeah.
But what you need to do is if you've got a client who wants to ask for closing costs and they're interested in a particular property and what you feel like a fair offer price would be without closing costs, you need to give the property address and tax information to the lender so they can give you a really solid estimate of what their cash to close looks like.
Okay.
And then that way you can reverse engineer how much closing costs you need to ask for in the offer.
Right.
So when people say, you'll get people that'll say, well, what's average? Well, we use 3 as a ballpark, but you need to get the number from your lender. Okay. That's the easy way to tee up. If you've got somebody who's not ready to have a conversation with a lender, well, I'm not the person to answer that question for you. But if we give them the specific address, they can.
Right.
The other thing is to the next point, it says, you know, you can't request unlimited seller concessions. Depending on the loan type, et cetera, they're capped to a specific percentage of the loan size. You need to make sure you're having that conversation with your lender, that you understand what loan type they're using and also what restrictions there are. Here's another thing that sellers will say, or buyers will say. I want the seller to pay all my closing costs. Put that in the offer. Now, how does that work?
So how do you put that on the contract?
You can't.
You
have to
can't.
put
You put a dollar amount and then it goes
Yeah.
back to them.
100%. We have to give a specific amount. We can't say where you're going to cover all my closing costs. Who's going to accept an offer that has a blank check in it?
Right.
I don't know what your situation is. I don't know what your closing costs are. Again, we got to talk to the lender, give them the property address so they can look up the tax info, so they can get an estimate for insurance. We've got a closing date. They can reverse engineer what your cash closing would be. We know how much you have in hand, so we know what the difference is that we can try to ask for from the seller. Make sense? So just make sure you're being overly thorough in explaining that to folks when the subject of closing costs come up. I always want to get closing costs from my folks if they need it, right? And here's the line I'll use. You know, when I bought my house, I got the seller to pay $5K in closing costs. Now, yeah, I probably paid a little bit more for the house, but I needed that $5K to replace the granite and paint the house and do the carpet, you know? So there are different ways to do it. Just make sure that you're explaining how the process works and why we have to have a specific number and then what we have to do to get to that specific number. Make sense? Now, based on
What do
this,
you do?
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, what do you do? I guess there's even more restrictions when it's like a builder and new construction.
When it comes
you-
to new construction, the price is going to be set anyways,
Right,
and whatever their incentives are going to be set anyways.
right. So there's no
So-
like asking for closing costs, whatever.
I will always. Here's the thing: builders are different down there than they are up here.
Okay,
So the question I always ask is, hey, ask the listing agent, the builder rep, what incentives are you offering? All right.
okay.
Normally, it's $500 if you use my attorney,
Yeah.
Or lend.
$1,500 if you use my lender.
Or put a fence in and don't charge me for it.
Right.
It just depends.
Yeah.
I mean, each builder is different. I've worked with a bunch of different ones.
That
and
all
they're
do different things.
Yeah, definitely.
It seems, and talking to all of you and your experience down there, it's a lot more varied than it is up here. Here, it's
Okay.
pretty cut and dry. It's use our attorney. Well, you're going to use our attorney because builders want you to use their attorney. And then if you use our lender, you get X, and then the builder might be willing to kick in another Y. But that's it.
Okay.
No negotiation on the sales price, you know, et cetera. Design credit if it hadn't started construction, something like that. Make sense?
Actually makes it easy for us.
Exactly.
It does.
Yeah,
I
I
love
just-
working with new construction because there's no debate. This is it. This is how it works. But you got to make sure you're setting that expectation going into it, right? So they don't think that it's like buying a resale house.
Yeah, the couple I just had really needed closing costs, so we had to ask over list price, but to net the same for the builder. But then we had to deal with the appraisal on the backside of that and work hard to get the value. So
Did it make value?
the list agent and I worked hard and we made it work. Yes, we got value.
That was
That was
that's
the
an
new-
exception.
Yeah,
And I'm glad it worked out. But here's the thing. You set the expectation that chances were it's not going to work out. So you got to be prepared if it doesn't.
right.
And then, hey, if we get lucky, if everybody knows and we're on the same page and they're ready to adjust when we have to, that's one thing. If we get lucky, that's great. If not, then, well, we already discussed what you have to do, right? That's the big thing. Just make sure you have the discussion. Don't assume that people understand what's going on. That's the biggest thing that we do is make sure that people understand. And the longer you do this, the easier it can be to take for granted that people understand what's going on because you've done it 100 times
Yeah.
and they've done it 0 times, you know? So never forget that. One thing that's in our mission and vision and value statement is, our tenets is that we personalize each interaction, right? Just because you know how something typically plays out doesn't mean it's going to for a specific buyer or seller. And their situation is unique to them anyway, so don't forget that when you're having the conversations about how it can play out to explain it to them. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a new construction not appraised for the like list price, which there was then the same model listed for like 5,000 higher that were under contract already. So don't ever even just assume that the house itself is gonna appraise, because
Right.
that was a nightmare. We worked
And
it
here's
out.
the thing too.
They didn't care.
If your client's using a VA loan, then they're protected, right? But it still
Well, yeah.
doesn't. It still doesn't mean the builder's going to adjust the price
Oh yeah,
if
they
it
wouldn't.
doesn't appraise, right? So
Come out
again,
of pocket.
Yep.
most builders will, but in the case of a VA, they might feel like, hey, well, look, I can get it. It's not my problem. The VA didn't approve it. I'll just put it back on the market.
Somebody else will grab it.
Yeah,
Right.
he told me, he said, you go, just send me the termination. I'll have it under contract by Friday.
Is it a townhouse?
What?
Is it a townhouse?
It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so you got to be prepared for that. Here's the thing. It's on us to have the conversations with our folks. So if something like that happens, they're not blindsided by it. Because if your folks get blindsided by something like that, 9 times out of 10, it's because we didn't take the time to have the conversation to prepare them for it. And that's at the heart of everything we do, is set expectations. Good, bad, unknown. Explain what scenarios are possible. That's what we do. So people make informed decisions about how to proceed, right? So just keep that in mind. The rest of this stuff can probably fluctuate with regard to percentages and whatnot. So I suggest you talk to the expert, your lender partner, to get specifics on numbers, okay? Without really getting too far into that. And then what is possible, which isn't necessarily on here, but if you do have too much closing costs and you can't apply it to any other vendor invoices or anything like that, you can always be refunded your prepaids to make up for that. Lenders will do that. They'll give you back your earnest money and your due diligence money if you have overages. So there are ways to work around it, but the best thing to do is not put yourself in a position where you have to do that, because it just can just cause issues, unneeded issues later on. So when you have a specific property and you're asking for closing costs, go to the lender so they can give you a very accurate estimate of what that person's going to need based on their specific situation, loan type, cash on hand, etc. Is that helpful?
Yes.
That's the biggie I wanted to talk about today, was just to discuss closing costs. Anybody else have any thoughts or issues or questions about it?
Doug, I have something it's off topic, but I was kind of telling everyone prior to you getting on the call. I had a client call me this morning at 3:45 a.m. So that he either bump dialed me or he works night shift. So should I call him later tonight? I sent him a text, but he won't text me back. So
No, I'd call him as soon as I got the message. If he can call you at 3:45, you can call him at 9:56.
okay.
You know, I mean, if he's somebody that would call like that, it's like you said, he either is trying to be funny or that's the only time he talks. So he should be understanding that he had to leave you a message, that you could leave him a message so you can communicate. And
Yeah.
then just ask him when's the best time to talk. Like, I don't just work 9 to 5, but it's going to be hard for me to answer the phone at 3:50 in the morning unless you give me some heads up.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, I've answered the phone, especially after I start working with people after 11 o'clock a lot of nights. Written offers near midnight a lot of nights.
Yeah.
That kind of comes with it. You have to set the expectation with to dictate how the relationship is going to go with folks. Some folks will take advantage of you if you're always available. So make sure you're available to people who know that they're trying to actually do something. They're not just messing around.
Yeah.
Right? If I've got someone who's serious and we're about to make a discussion, I'll talk to you at midnight all night long. I've got somebody who looks at 60 houses a day and they have to talk with a lender and they're not ready to meet, then I'll text you, but you know, you gotta use your best judgment on that. But you know how we talk about being in control? If you don't set the expectation, somebody else will. And once it's set, it's over with. So, but yeah, I'd call him back as soon as we get off this call. Just go like, hey, sorry I missed you. I don't know if you work late nights or whatever. I don't just work 9 to 5. Let me know when we can connect. I'll make myself available when I have to be. Look forward to talking to you.
Okay.
Something like that. Hope it goes well, Tiffany.
Sorry to ditch out.
That's okay. We're done. Anybody have anything else?
Nope.
All right. Fantastic. Dustin, why don't you stay on the call and we'll do your pipeline, and then Charles, I'll call you.
Hey, Doug, can you send that?
Yeah, I'm going to make some edits and then it'll go on the resources page.
Okay.
Anybody have anything else? All right. Everybody have a great day tomorrow. It's Wednesday and you don't have to come to the office to meet with me.
I'm closing tomorrow.
Yay!
All right. All right.